Hi everyone, and welcome to Exploring the Build. If you just found this place, then welcome. And if you're returning, I'm glad to have you back. I'm Alex, and this is my channel where we explore and theory craft different character builds for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. Today, we're doing another quick build. We'll be exploring a briefly summarized build for Dungeons & Dragons 5e. As always with quick builds, feel free to let me know in the comments below if there are any builds that you'd like to see me explore in the future. Today, I happened to pick up a copy of the new D&D book, Bigby's Glory of Giants. I thought it was actually releasing next week though, but I happened to be in my local bookstore and saw that it was out and available and decided to pick up a copy. So I figured I would also use it today for our quick build. When I was looking through the options presented in the book, there's really only one main subclass that's released, which is a Barbarian subclass. So yes, we're doing another Barbarian build today. But when I was looking at the Barbarian build and what they offered, I realized that there was actually a little bit that helps with our previous quick build, the Tree Sentinel. Essentially, this subclass, the Path of the Giant Barbarian, gives a lot of features that actually mimic what the Tree Sentinel got. Now, you could technically take that subclass, since it's now official content, over the Unearthed Arcana that we used in that quick build, and that would be perfectly fine. You'd still gain a lot of area of control, you wouldn't have a restricted movement, and you'd be a barbarian, which would give you a lot of bonuses in terms of damage and durability. The other thing you could do is you could actually combine the two of them. The new subclass offers a whole lot in terms of what we get for damage. It increases our reach. Technically it increases our size, but the increase to size from the Barbarian subclass as well as the Ranger subclass that we had picked up in the last build wouldn't stack, but the reach would. So we'd actually get a further area of control for our reach, and eventually we'd be able to pick up Elemental Cleaver, which allows us to essentially throw whatever type of weapon we're holding, even if that's a two-handed polearm like what we were using in that build. And on top of all that, you'd still be a barbarian, meaning you'd get access to reckless attack, rage, resistance, all that good stuff. And overall, you would be a very powerful Sentinel build. For today's build though, we're not going to be worrying too much about a size increase or an increase to our reach, even though those are actually notable benefits from this new subclass. We're instead going to be focusing on the ability to throw weapons. The concept of our build today is going to use the Path of the Giant Barbarian, like I said, but we're specifically building around the Elemental Cleaver feature. This feature allows us to turn any weapon we have into a thrown weapon. And then the Path of the Giant Barbarian also has synergies with thrown weapons that boost their damage. And that's nice because we haven't had a lot of support for thrown weapons. But the unfortunate thing that I think either the designers missed, or maybe they just didn't want to include, which I guess is fair, is that the staple Reckless Attack Barbarian feature is specifically only melee attacks, meaning that we won't gain Reckless Attack when we're throwing, unless your DM's nice and allows it, of course. And while that isn't a huge issue, it just means that our attack rolls are going to be a little more unreliable than your average barbarian. Now, the flip side of that is that we can attack at range more reliably. At the end of the build, though, we'll be a fairly tanky and durable character since we're just a barbarian, but we'll also have some features that allow us to do quite a lot of thrown weapon fighting and hopefully mix it up in actual melee combat as well when we really need to. Starting in character creation, we're going to go with human variant for this build. You could go custom lineage, but the +1 to 2 different stat increases instead of just the +2 to 1 ability score increase is actually going to be better for us. We want a wider array of ability scores rather than just a couple specialized ones. If you wanted to build more around the reach features of the Path of the Giant Barbarian, like I was sort of talking about a few minutes ago, you could admittedly still go something like Bugbear and just pick up the feats that we're going to get for free at character creation later on. For us though, we're a human variant. We're going to take the free feat Dual Wielder, which does not increase our stats, but it does allow us to wield 2 melee weapons of any kind, as long as they're one-handed each. And then we can use the 2 weapon fighting properties with those, even if they're not actually light weapons. So we could attack with a longsword in our main hand and attack with another longsword in our offhand. We also gain a +1 bonus to our AC when wielding both those weapons, and we can draw them at the same time. A lot of nice bonuses for dual wielding. For our background, you can pick anything. Glory of Giants did actually come with a couple of different backgrounds that are meant to be played with giant-themed characters. However, I'm more worried about throwing weapons and actually being giant-themed. You could take those, and they do offer free feats as well, technically, but again, The whole concept of a background offering a free feat is relatively new, and while I've used some like the Dragonlance backgrounds for some builds, I'm going to hold off on this one just for right now. Feel free to take them though if you would like. For our ability scores, we're going to use point buy, and we want to wind up with the following ability scores. We're going to put a +1 into strength to give us 16 strength. We're going to take 14 dexterity and 14 constitution, and we're putting our last +1 into intelligence to give us 13 intelligence. We then have 8 wisdom and 8 charisma to finish off. For the actual level breakdown of the build, we're going to start by looking at levels 1 to 10. Our build really comes online at level 8, though it's sort of there at level 6. But let me explain why. First of all, our first choice comes at level 4, since at level 3 we know we want to be a Path of the Giant Barbarian, and we're just going up full Barbarian for the first 6 levels. Level 4 is an ability score increase or feat, and we want to increase our strength to be as high as possible, so that way our thrown weapon attacks can be as accurate as possible and deal as much damage as possible. Next, at level 6, we gain Elemental Cleaver. We already have extra attack, and until now we've probably been focused more on melee than throwing, and I think that's the way the build should probably work for the most part, but we're going to have a lot of capabilities to throw eventually, which will be really nice. At level 6 we gain Elemental Cleaver. I'm going to say it's a Warhammer since that seems kind of cool, though you could reasonably pick any weapon you want, just make it as big as possible without making it two-handed, though I'll get to that in a second. When we make that weapon an Elemental Cleaver, it now has the Thrown property. Because of the way our dual wielder feat works, we can use the 2-weapon fighting basic rules from 5th edition, regardless of whether or not the weapons we're using are light. Part of those 2-weapon fighting rules are the fact that we can throw a weapon with the Thrown property from both our main hand and our offhand. This means that since our Warhammer now has the Thrown property and then just returns to us, we could attack twice with that and then make another attack with our offhand, which again could be a thrown weapon. This one isn't going to return to us, but assuming you pick something that's fairly cheap and easily replaceable, like a hand axe for now, that could work just fine. As big of a damage die as possible to sort of get as much mileage out of it as possible. Now, the one thing that the Path of the Barbarian subclass doesn't specify, but implies, and you might want to talk to your DM about, is the fact that it says any weapon that we have gains the Thrown property. That would include two-handed weapons, like a great axe, or a great sword, or like a polearm, which normally, again, can never be thrown really because they require 2 hands. If that's the case, then perhaps we would be allowed to use our versatile Warhammer in 2 hands, allowing it to be a D10 damage die, and then throw it, catch it in 1 hand, and then throw our trident. If your DM allows that, that's really awesome. If not, I suppose that's fair. It's just something to keep in mind since the Path of the Barbarian subclass technically allows you to just start throwing a great axe if you really want to. There's no restriction. The assumed restriction is that for most thrown weapons in D&D, they're supposed to be thrown with 1 hand, not 2. If you're able to use it, great. If not, oh well. For now, it is important that we want our 1 hand to be free for the offhand attack. We don't have a way to just draw and throw the weapon all in one go. We want to be able to hold it in our hand, at least most of the time. By level 8, though, we'll have the issues with our offhand attack pretty much solved. Now, noticeably, we took 13 intelligence. That's because at level 7, we're going to multiclass into Artificer, and then go up an extra level into level 8 in order to pick up infusions. Right away, we can pick the infusion returning weapon, which allows us to pick a non-magical weapon and turn it into a +1 magic weapon that just automatically comes back into our hand when we throw it. The weapon, of course, has to have the thrown weapon property, but we could take something like a trident and turn it into a magic returning weapon, and then throw our Elemental Cleaver, throw it again, and then throw our trident, and then have both those weapons just automatically come back to us without even having to try and worry about going and picking them up. So notably so far, we've got 1 weapon that can be anything we want, and it's just going to have the thrown weapon property, and that's our primary weapon. The other weapon, that's our offhand, can be any size we want, but it has to already have the thrown weapon property in order to make this actually work. After we've picked up this returning weapon feature from Artificer, we're going to go back to Barbarian to finish off our first 10 levels with Barbarian 8, and that's just going to give us an extra ability score improvement / feat. We could cap our strength at 20, But for now, I think it's okay to wait, and we'd actually want to pick up either the Sharpshooter feat, or pick up the Fighting Initiate feat, or just take a level in Fighter. The Fighting Initiate feat allows us to gain a fighting style of our choice. Likewise, a level in Fighter would allow us to gain a fighting style of our choice. And if we do this, we can pick up the Thrown Weapon fighting style. It just gives us a +2 bonus to our damage with thrown weapons, which is nice to have. But then it also lets us throw weapons just fluidly with the attacks that we make with those weapons. We can just draw them right away and throw them. We don't have to already have them in our hands or spend time interacting with objects in order to draw the weapons beforehand. Since our 2 weapons return to us all the time after we've attacked with them, that's not too important. But what is important is that we could technically have our Elemental Cleaver be a big 2-handed weapon. We could attack twice with it, and then say hold it in one hand and quickly draw and throw our other offhanded weapon all in one bonus action attack. It's really niche and kind of weird, but it does technically, rules as written, help with our action economy if we wanted to use 2 hands on our Elemental Cleaver weapon attacks to have a better damage die with that weapon when we're throwing it. All that aside though, I think Sharpshooter's kind of the way to go. Sharpshooter's also a little confusing, but essentially the way it works with thrown weapons is that we don't get the big -5 to attack +10 to damage bonus, but we do gain the other applicable bonuses. The one that lets us throw weapons outside of our normal range increments, so we can now have a range of 60 feet with both our thrown weapons. And then we also can ignore cover when an enemy is behind cover and we're throwing at them. For what it's worth, looking at our build, we now are kind of odd, given that we are a Barbarian Artificer and we're focused solely on thrown weapons for the most part. We are definitely a very powerful skirmisher at least, so that means that we can mix it up both on the front line and a bit of a back line in combat, and we can really get to where we need to be when we need to be there. Overall, that's a pretty neat way to build a martial character, and it's nice to see some thrown weapon support for our characters, since normally there hasn't really been any in D&D 5e. For the rest of the levels in our build, levels 11 to 20, it doesn't really matter what we do. You could go up more of the path of the Giant Barbarian if you want to see what this new subclass has to offer. In my mind though, and just from a brief reading of what it can give us, there's nothing that really helps our build in particular with throwing weapons. We could also go Artificer, but again, Artificer has spells and they don't really mesh well with a Barbarian, though you could just save those spells for when you're not raging. And they also have some interesting features in each of their subclasses. However, again, we didn't really improve our intelligence to make those features as good as they possibly could be. For us, I'm going to say we're actually going to backtrack a little bit and not go up to Barbarian 8, and instead go up to Fighter 11. That way we can have just a 3rd attack. Obviously, if you weren't actually going up to level 20 in like this theory-crafted build is, Barbarian 8 is perfectly fine, and just keep doing with what we had done so far. With Fighter at level 10, we gain a fighting style, and it's about time we actually picked up the 2-weapon fighter fighting style. We've been using 2-weapon fighting. We've been using dual wielder to make our 2-weapon fighting with thrown weapons more efficient, but we never actually picked up the 2-weapon fighter fighting style, which allows us to add our strength modifier to our offhand weapon attacks. Our Elemental Cleaver has really been carrying us so far, but now our other weapon, I envision it as a trident, but you can pick whatever you want. That thrown weapon is now starting to play a bit of catch-up. We eventually gain Action Surge, as well as 3 extra ability score improvements / feats. We get 1 at Fighter 4, 1 at Fighter 6, and 1 at Fighter 8. And because of the split on this triple class build, that means that we're only ever getting 4 ability score improvements total. We already have our strength at 18, which is really awesome. So now it would be time to pick up Sharpshooter at Fighter 4. At level 6 and level 8, you can pick pretty much whatever you want. I would recommend increasing our strength to 20 to cap it off, and probably increasing our constitution. Or actually, even just increasing our constitution twice to put it up to 18 to match our strength. At Fighter 3 though, this is actually one of our other more important choices, and it is, what do we want to do with our fighter subclass? We have a lot of choice, and admittedly, there are some good options, but there are also some bad ones. See, we don't want something that really relies on a bonus action, because we want to save that for our thrown weapon, or at least our offhand melee attack. For the sake of our build, I'm going to say we are taking the Champion subclass. Champion will eventually give us an extra fighting style at level 10, where if we haven't picked up that thrown weapon fighting style by then we can do that. And if we did pick it up somehow earlier, then take defense or something else instead. We also just get an improved critical and can now crit on 19 and 20 instead of just 20. Besides that, everything else we get is just straight fighter and champion fighter features, and there's nothing that really stands out for us. Alright, with all that out of the way, let's summarize the build. We're a very versatile character, given that we can pretty much do whatever we can do at melee, at range as well. We do admittedly miss out on reckless attack, but we still have an increased crit chance, we still add our rage damage to our thrown weapons, and we can still make as many attacks with our thrown weapons as we do with our melee attacks. Because we also dipped into Artificer, we do have some spell casting, which I didn't really talk about, as well as an extra infusion just sort of lying around. Combining those two together, we can actually provide a little bit of utility as well, just doing some spell casting outside of combat, and giving that infusion to any party member that needs something special whenever they do need it. Admittedly though, the one main regret for this build is that we didn't really build specifically for damage, or all the damage that we could possibly do with thrown weapons. Technically, we could have taken darts, and darts are both ranged and thrown weapons, meaning that they get all the bonuses from thrown weapons as well as the sharpshooter bonus. The archery fighting style, plus the thrown weapon fighting style, would apply to both the attack and damage of every single one of our attacks, and then we could also sharpshooter on every single one of our attacks. And if you were to add that up and make a big assumption that we hit on each one of those attacks that we made, overall that would be a round of 86 damage on average, which is very insane, but it's also a very big assumption that we're hitting each dart that we attack with. And while it's a very impressive amount of theoretical average damage, the actual amount is going to be a bit lower, and because darts are ranged weapons, not melee weapons, rules as written, we'd be in trouble as soon as an enemy got right in our face. Whereas with our build, we've traded a little bit of that average damage, but instead we've picked up versatility with the ability to hit them really hard with reckless attack and melee, and then when they try to run away from us, just stand and throw the weapons and still do hopefully about as much damage as we do in melee. Overall, we're still a barbarian, so we have a lot of hit points as well as resistance, we've got some utility, and we've got some good combat versatility. Let me know what you thought of the build, and what you would do to get closer to the concept of a raging thrower or a giant thrower. And also, let me know what you thought of the Bigby's Glory of Giants, if you happen to have picked up a book by now, or just have seen the features that are getting added. Either way though, thank you for coming on the journey with me, and I hope to see you in the next one.